Don't be afraid to start. Don't be afraid to fail, because failing is actually the only way you're going to learn. If you're not failing, you're not learning. And if you look at Christian from Xanadu, Armin from IntelliJoint, Toby from Shopify, they took a risk. They were passionate about an idea and they tried. And so the best piece of advice is don't be afraid to fail. And if you fail, that's okay. That's actually great, because that means you've learned something, or there are resources that are out there that are available to help you get started. And really, genuinely, there is no better time to become an entrepreneur than right now.
From laboccupier.com, welcome to NGBideas, a podcast about leaders in Canadian life sciences and the stories behind their journey. Hi, I'm your host, Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Claudia Krywiak, who is President and CEO of the Ontario Centre of Innovation. Claudia is a PhD chemist who spent the early part of her career in scientific instrumentation before making her way into the innovation ecosystem, first at MyTax and then at OCI, where she leads a team focused on elevating entrepreneurship across Ontario. If you're not familiar with the Ontario Centre of Innovation, it is a government-funded organization that helps small and medium-sized enterprises commercialize research. OCI brings together industry, academic, and government partners to invest in commercialization opportunities across the province. You know, one of the many things that struck me while speaking with Claudia is her curiosity. It shows up everywhere in our conversation, in the way she talks about science, the way she talks about her team and their clients, and in the work that she does. Curiosity is a central theme in her story, and as you'll hear, authenticity is as well. Before we get to today's interview, we'd like to remind our listeners this podcast is part of the NGBI podcasts in support of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. For details, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. We'd like to take a moment and let you know this podcast is sponsored by the National Research Council of Canada. NRC is a federal government organization that partners with Canadian industry to bring research from the lab to the marketplace. The NRC works with thousands of Canadian companies every year, helping them develop new technologies and find solutions to some of Canada's most pressing challenges. Thank you to the team at NRC for their support of the NGBI podcast. This episode of NGBideas was recorded in August 2025. Claudia, welcome to NGBideas.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I am so looking forward to a conversation. I read that you were born in the 1970s in Lublin, Poland, which is close to the Ukrainian border.
Yes.
So you're part Ukrainian?
Yes, my family's Ukrainian, but shortly after World War I, my family settled in Poland.
Okay. And to put things into perspective, our listeners in the Toronto area in particular, the drive from Lublin to the Ukrainian border is about the drive from Burlington to the other side of the GTA. It's quite close. It's like 90 kilometers plus.
Yes, it is. And so, in fact, I was born in a hospital in Lublin, but my hometown is a very small place called Zamość. And the drive from Zamość to the Ukrainian border is even less than that. So it's very close.
Okay. Do you still have family there?
Yes, I do. My father still lives in Zamość.
I hope no one's being directly affected by the tragedy going on in Ukraine at the moment.
So I do have some extended family in Ukraine, but even in Poland and especially in Zamość, where my father is, it is very close to the border. So there is a level of concern and it's impacting everyone, obviously in Ukraine, but also in Poland as well.
Yeah, and I hope it is all resolved sooner rather than later. So did you speak Polish or Ukrainian growing up or both?
So my first language was Polish, but we also spoke Ukrainian at home. So I spoke kind of Polish with Ukrainian mixed in, and then eventually, and it's a bit of a longer story, English became my first language.
Yeah, we're going to get there.
I always have to kind of think about when people ask me, well, what's your first language? And I'm like, well, it depends.
What year are we talking? So to that end, in the 1970s, Poland was a communist country and travel was highly restricted. And your parents were able to take you and your brother, who we'll talk about in a moment, to Dubai, which kind of surprised me. And then when I thought about it, I thought, okay, it's not so much of a surprise. But do you know why they chose Dubai?
So you're right. At that time, it was very difficult to travel out of the country, whether for personal reasons or for work. And the only countries you could really travel to, if you were in Poland at that time, would be other countries that had communist governments, or you could travel to the Middle East. And my family moved because my father was an architect, was able to have a work placement in Dubai in the Middle East. And that was one of the places that travel was allowed to at that time.
So you were what, about 4 or 5 years old when you went to Dubai?
Yes. So I'm quite young. I still do have a recollection of actually landing Dubai because that was my first time being on a flight and on a very, very long flight. And I remember getting off the plane and just having travel sickness. So I was very, very nauseated. And that memory has stuck with me. So I actually remember landing in Dubai and just feeling very, very sick. It's a long flight.
Wrong kind of memory that you want. So you landed in Dubai with your parents and you've got a younger brother, is it?
Yes, so I have a younger brother. He's about 2 years younger than me.
Okay. And when you were growing up, were you adversaries or allies?
I think we were allies because from a very young age, we moved from Zamość to Dubai and then eventually from Dubai made our way to Canada. So we kind of always felt like a team and we always felt like a team within our families. So that's not to say we didn't argue like cats and dogs, as the expression goes. So we were definitely allies, but not without our adversarial moments, that's for sure.
I'd like to talk about your parents for a moment. Your father's still with us?
Yes, he is.
And what's his name?
John.
Could you tell us about him? What kind of person is he?
Sure. So my father studied architecture and was an architect. And until recently, until he retired, he continued to work in that function, largely for government, for kind of the municipal level of government. The thing that is most striking to me about him is he's very artistic. He can draw and paint beautifully. And whenever I visit, because we do go back to Zamość, there are these kind of beautiful sketches that he had done. And I would always kind of wonder, well, why did you decide to go into kind of architecture and not become an artist? And he would just kind of laugh that off and say, well, to pay the bills, basically. But yeah, so he's always kind of struck me as being someone who has this kind of very creative side, but has always been in these roles that require more kind of logical thinking. And
so practical mindset.
Yes.
Okay. And your mother?
My parents divorced a while ago.
Oh,
my father's in Poland and my mother's here with us in Canada.
What is her name?
Helena.
And who is she? And what is she like?
So she has a very interesting story. She trained as a civil engineer and worked as a civil engineer in Poland, very, very accomplished in that regard. When my family moved to Dubai, there was no opportunity for her as a woman to continue as a civil engineer during that time, but to continue in any kind of related role. And so she pivoted and she actually became a florist. That's probably not what you were expecting me to say. The opportunity presented itself to her because at the time in the expat community in Dubai, there were a number of kind of individuals and a number of businesses. And these businesses actually were looking for women because, for example, the florist, in order to go into the compounds and into the women's part of the compound, you actually needed a woman to deliver.
Oh, right.
So that's how she got that role. She really embraced it as well. And this is what she has in my father, kind of that creative edge as well, because she makes beautiful floral arrangements. But she pivoted. And then eventually when we did come to Canada, she had to pivot again and started a very successful catering and then restaurant business as well. So one of the things that I really admire in my mother is her ability to turn challenges into opportunities and to seize opportunities and adapt. And she's very agile in that regard. And also she is the world's best cook. She'll be listening to this. So for the record.
box ticked.
Yes.
So your father's in Poland, your mother's here with you in Toronto. Where is your brother?
He's in Toronto as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what path did he pursue?
So he pursued an interesting path. He originally studied mathematics and finance. And when he graduated, he went to work at one of the big banks. And after a couple of years, decided that that's not what he wanted to do. And so he quit, much to my mother's horror. And after a few months of living at home and trying to figure out what to do, my mother said to him, okay, well, you're not just going to sit at home. You're going to come work for me. And she had her restaurant at the time. And so he went to work for her and realized that he actually wanted to go to chef school. So he ended up going to George Brown
Really? Wow.
College, and he studied the culinary arts, then ended up working in the industry, realized he didn't like it as much as he thought he would. So then decided to go back to school. So went to the London School of Economics to do a master's degree. And then when he came back, he found himself working for a number of companies, but basically in the data analytics sector. And right now he works for one of the large grocery chains as a senior level executive. And it's related all to data analytics and customer insights and all of those good things. That's kind of like my mother, the adaptability.
Now, if I were to ask your brother who you resemble more of your parents, what would he say?
So everyone says I look like my mother. And he would also say that I really look like my mother. But then he would argue that I probably don't resemble either my mother or my father in terms of the path that I decided to pursue.
In mindset?
I think in mindset, but also just where both of them have this kind of artistic side to them. I've always been very, very analytical, including in what I decided to study. I ended up doing chemistry.
We heard about that too. Yeah.
And then a PhD. I love science. And so I think in that regard, he would probably say that I lack that kind of artistic.
And that's okay.
I think I'm artistic.
Well, there's an art to numbers and science. So give that back to him. So you moved to Dubai when you were about 5. Then the family, was it the whole family that moved to Toronto when you were about 9?
No, it was just my mother and myself. And my father decided to go back.
Okay. And why Toronto?
So my uncle and my grandparents had already been in Canada for several years, and my mother decided to join.
Okay. Do you remember that conversation when she sat you and your brother down and said, we're going to Canada?
Actually, I don't remember the specific conversation. I remember traveling to Canada. I remember arriving in Canada. And I mean, this sounds like a cliche. And I remember it being very, very cold when we arrived after it was very, very warm where we were before. But honestly, I don't remember at that point because I was quite young and moving around and traveling was normal. It didn't seem like a major life event. It just seemed like, okay, now we're going to somewhere else.
So this would have been in the late 1970s. So that's
early 1980s.
Okay, so Star Wars time. So
yes, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I do remember the flight to Canada and the Star Wars movie. That's the first movie that I saw. That just came to me right now. That's funny. I haven't thought about that in a very, very long time.
So you became a fan of Star Wars immediately, like the rest of us, and everybody landed in a very cold new country. Did anybody say, yeah, no, let's go back?
Actually, my brother said that. He said that he wants to go back. And that's a funny story that my mother still tells to this day.
So your parents divorced, you came to a new country, you had family here, but that would be a daunting trip for anyone at any age. And you were so young, people might say kids are resilient. Do you remember that time of your life, like trying to fit in and that sort of thing?
So from that time, what I do remember wasn't so much my parents separating or kind of moving from Dubai to Toronto. What I do remember is going to school, and school really felt different in Toronto than it felt in Dubai. So Dubai, I went to St. Mary's, and there were kind of lots of kids from different places there. And maybe it's because I was much, much younger. So, I mean, we're talking about kind of like kindergarten versus being in a... in the later grades, but I do kind of remember trying to kind of fit in. So I spoke English because that's where I learned how to speak English. It was in Dubai. So by the time we came to Canada, I was already speaking, and so was my brother, English. So that wasn't a barrier, but it was kind of trying to come into your own identity. So, am I Ukrainian? Am I Canadian? Am I Polish? I speak English, but I'm starting to forget. Polish. Ukrainian, I was sent to Ukrainian Saturday school, and that was through elementary school and high school as well. So just kind of trying to fit in, just because even in the elementary school that I was in, other kids that were Ukrainian or Polish came from Ukraine or they came from Poland. They typically wouldn't come from Dubai or from other places. That's the part that I remember, just kind of trying to figure out, where do I fit in?
Yeah, and being, again, 10 and such a formative age, you would have difficulty, I would guess, I cannot imagine, but trying to fit in about TV shows and movies and music, and everything is so new.
Yes, and very different. So thankfully, I knew the Star Wars references, so that was good. There were lots of other references that initially I didn't, because we just weren't exposed to that in Dubai. But, it is true. Kids are very resilient and they learn very, very, very quickly. But that kind of sense of where do I belong, or kind of being a world traveler or something, has always stayed with me. And that's also kind of helped me have this perspective where it's okay not to fit in. Not everyone needs to fit in all the time. And sometimes it actually is a very good thing that if you're able to differentiate yourself. And that's something I think that I learned at a very young age, that it's okay to be different than other people.
That's a valuable lesson that unfortunately a lot of people don't learn. Given the circumstance that you arrived in Canada in, do you think that created a bit of a veneer where you were standoffish, or did you become a little more gregarious and start to meet people and reach out?
That's an interesting question. If I just look at myself in elementary school and in high school, I always had lots of friends, but there was always a little bit of a separation, because sometimes initially, if there isn't that immediate shared context or background, and you feel like you're kind of trying to catch up a little bit. I don't know if I would use the word standoffish, but maybe that's how I may have been perceived by some people. But I've always, and this goes back to my kind of analytical side, I've always taken the opportunity to kind of like sit back and assess a situation and be a bit more cautious than maybe at a young age other kids would be, just as I'm trying to get the lay of the land.
You mentioned earlier your mother, who was trained as an engineer, was a civil engineer, correct?
Yes.
So you got here, and I'm guessing she was not able to practice because of the licensing requirement.
Yeah, and this is something that unfortunately, even though it's been a very long time, still hasn't changed. But the lack of Canadian experience, it's kind of a catch-22. In order to get a position in her field, she needed Canadian experience. But because she didn't have Canadian experience, she couldn't get a position that would actually give her the relevant Canadian experience. And so she tried initially, but then just adapted, leveraged one of her strengths, which I think, all seriousness, she is an amazing cook. So she decided to start a business with some colleagues, and they did catering. And then eventually, several years later, that evolved into a restaurant. I've asked her, did she miss not being able to be an engineer? And she's always said, well, no, look at the opportunities that, being in catering and the restaurant business created for her. But I think it was very, very difficult for her. And I think it continues to be very, very difficult for many people that come to Canada, even today, in the same position, where they're not only highly skilled and trained, but they have significant experience, and then they find themselves literally having to start all over again professionally.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can correct that situation. We've got a lot of talent here that's not being realized. Where in Toronto were you growing up? What part of the city?
Etobicoke, actually. So when we arrived, we initially lived with my grandparents, and they were settled in Etobicoke. And then we continued to stay in Etobicoke. And it's funny, when I got married, we lived in Brampton, my husband and I, but then somehow found our way back to Etobicoke. And my mother, my brother, and myself, we literally live within 2 minutes by car of each other, more or less in the same neighborhood where we grew up in. It's a beautiful part of the city. It's the best of worlds. You have the proximity to the city, but then you also have beautiful parks.
So are we talking kind of the central part? And for the listeners who are not familiar with the Toronto area, Etobicoke is the western kind of boundary that borders on the city of Mississauga along the 427. So you were kind of in is it the Kingsway area?
So Humber Valley Kingsway is where I am right now. That's not where I grew up, but that's where I am right now. But we've always been in central Etobicoke.
Oh, it's a lovely part of the city. So you went to public school in the area. Did you have to walk I guess you could walk to school in that area?
So I went to a Catholic school, so public, but in the separate school board system. So we were bused. And it wasn't a very long bus ride, but just everyone was bused during that time. And the thing I remember about being on the bus is I would love to just like look out the window and just see different parts of the city as the bus went through different parts of the cities. And that's something I still love doing today. I hate driving. I am not a driver, but put me in the passenger seat and I am more than I'm good to go. I'm more than happy just to like for hours just stare out.
Hi, it's Jim. When we come back, Claudia talks about arriving in Canada as a young girl and what it was like trying to figure out where she fit in. Don't go away. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas, Canada's Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. Hi, it's Jim here. If you're a new listener, we'd like you to know one of the goals of this podcast is to share the personal story of leaders in Canadian life sciences. We try to provide some insight on who the people are behind the LinkedIn profiles and corporate bios and hear about the lessons they've learned on their journey. We hope you like what we're doing, and if you do, we have a small favor to ask. We will greatly appreciate you telling your friends about us and promoting us on social. You can use the hashtags NGBI, NGBideas, NGBI Podcasts, and NGBI Summit. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your pods so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you so much for your support. It is very much appreciated. Okay, let's get back to our conversation. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Claudia Krywiak from the Ontario Centre of Innovation in Toronto. Now, I read that was it grade 8, you won an award, an academic award?
I won an academic award, well, 2 academic awards. So one, yes, in grade 8, it was the math award. And I think probably what you're referring to, someone in prep for this had asked me, were you always good at school? And I thought I was okay at school. Like I wasn't super smart, I thought. I was like middle of the pack. But it was in grade 8 when I realized, hey, maybe I am smarter than I think. Because at the end of grade 8, they give out all of the awards. And I ended up winning the math award. And I remember saying to my grade 8 teacher afterwards, I'm like, really, me for the math award? Math is hard. Why did I get the math award? And she said to me, but look how much you've accomplished. Like, look at your mark. And I did. And it was actually in the very high 90s. Wow. And so that was the moment where I'm like, hey, maybe I'm a STEM person. Well, I didn't say STEM at the time because that term wasn't a term that we used. But I thought, hey, maybe I like science and maybe I like mathematics. So that's where that math award.
So it planted a seed, obviously.
It planted a seed.
So where did you go to high school?
Bishop Allen Academy. So it was also in the separate school board system and also in Etobicoke on Royal York. We were the first year at that time. Back then, it was a new high school that had just opened. So that was really an opportunity because it was small. Now it's still around. It's very, very large, as most of the high schools in the public and the separate school board system in Toronto are. But at that time, it was small. It was just several hundred. And it felt like a really special environment to have, great teachers, and also the class sizes were really conducive to like a lot of discussions and a lot of attention from the teachers. So.
And I read that you had was it a journaling assignment in grade 10?
Oh, yes, I did. So I still have this because my mother was
going to ask.
was decluttering a while back. And so she found all of these in her basement and she called Mark, my brother, and I and said, okay, like either you get rid of this stuff or you take it away or I get rid of this stuff. And it was one of those journal where you had to do a page on kind of like 30 years, where would I like to find myself? Or what do I want to do 30 years from now? And in there, I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I found that really interesting because notwithstanding what I just said about math and thinking, hey, math is for me, but apparently in high school,
You wanted to be a lawyer.
I wanted to be a lawyer. That is not a track that I ended up taking, but at one point I thought I would, I guess.
I'm wondering if there was a TV show back then where you may have been inspired.
Possibly.
So it sounds like marks came easier to you than they did to me. We'll put it that way.
And especially in high school, they came very easily to me in high school. I ended up graduating with the Governor General's Medal. It's like a bronze medal for the highest graduating average in the high school. And so I ended up getting that. I studied, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't hard. Now, university's another story because that was an eye-opener. It's like kind of like, you're a big fish in a little pond, and then you're a little fish in a very, very, very big pond. But high school and studying came very easily to me.
Yeah, we were absolutely not in the same academic circles, I'll tell you that. So back then, high school was 5 years. Did you have any favorite courses? I'm guessing math was one of them.
So I ended up taking, for the 5th year, which was OAC, I think it was still called at the time. And so I ended up doing, I did biology at the grade 13 level, physics, both maths, algebra, and calculus. English is what everyone had to do. And so I don't know, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but it looks like I took all of the maths and sciences.
Your heart was going one way, but your brain was going another.
So.
That's funny. Did you play any sports, belong to any clubs?
In high school, yes, newspaper club. I love to read. I've always loved to read fiction. And so I volunteered in the high school library. I remember Ms. Jositis was the librarian, and she was phenomenal because she exposed me to all sorts of writers that I otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to or found my way to them on my own, at least in high school. So this was way before the digital age. This was where, the Dewey Decimal System, and it's whatever you kind of see. So unless someone's recommending something to you, come across it. And so, yes, high school newspaper, library, club, must have been something else as well. And in fact, I have 3 girlfriends. We go back all the way to high school. One of them actually
that's
back
nice.
to elementary school, and we still see each other. So every 4 to 5 months, we go to each other's places or have dinner parties or we see each other. And I look back very fond at that. So Stephanie, Andrea, and Gosha, because we hung out in high school together. We were in these same clubs, newspaper club, library. And we're still friends today. And so, we don't all live in Toronto, but we all still keep in touch.
Jobs, you mentioned your mother had a restaurant. Did you work in the restaurant?
So initially for the catering, absolutely. That is something that on weekends, all throughout high school, both my brother and I would work at these various catering events. My area of specialty was the sweet tables. So I would slice up cakes, but they would also have these fruit platters and stuff like that. And I can actually do a really mean fruit platter based on the years of experience. Because back at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, what was popular were carved things out of the pineapples and stuff like that, peacocks and those types of things. So
you can do that?
I can do that. And I actually do love to entertain. And I'm not saying that at the time as a teenager, I enjoyed having to work on the weekends for my mom, but I do love to entertain. And I think that's where I got that from her. So I'm very particular about my fruit platters.
Fair enough. So you graduated high school, you did extraordinarily well, and you decided to go to the University of Toronto.
Yes.
And I'm wondering why you chose U of T. Was it geographically desirable or the program?
So it was twofold. I mean, U of T has a very good and well-deserved reputation academically. There was a bit of my mother and other family members saying, well, you have one of the top universities anywhere in Canada in your backyard. Why would you go anywhere else? But I also felt like I didn't want to leave Toronto. And I felt because most of my youth was spent traveling and kind of not being settled. And finally, I was kind of coming into my own and really feeling like I was settled and I belonged in Toronto. And just when I was starting to feel that way, I think, and this is now looking back, me reflecting, looking back, I'm sure at the time, when I made the decision, I probably wasn't aware of it in that way, but I knew I did not want to go away to school, that I wanted to stay. And even in terms of where I applied to, it was mostly local schools. And I was very happy when I got into the University of Toronto because that was my first choice. That's where I wanted to go, and I wanted to stay in Toronto.
So, and then at U of T, this would have been 94, I guess.
Yes.
You were there in 94 to 98. You were living at home?
Yes, I was living at home.
Okay, makes sense.
Yes.
And you were pursuing a chemistry degree, and I've got a history degree. And I think chemistry degrees are, and correct me if you disagree, but chemistry degrees are kind of like history degrees in that you get it, but it's really a stepping stone for a lot of people
Yes.
who want to go to law school or get a medical degree, and they're trying to pump their marks. Was that kind of on your radar?
So I think I ended up in chemistry because I was unsure what I wanted to do, and I was trying to keep my options open. So there was an element of, I said when I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. So there was an element of that. But I was drawn to the sciences. So I kind of felt like, okay, in my first and second year, it's much easier to do the sciences and then apply to law school than not do the sciences and do the social sciences and then decide you actually want to go into research or you want to go to medical school or something like that. So I was kind of keeping my options open. But in the process of keeping my options open, one day I found myself doing a PhD in chemistry. So I'm not sure how it was never me saying I want to be a chemist.
Okay.
But I did find myself really enjoying chemistry the most out of all of the sciences. I had an excellent professor, Professor Cynthia Go. She's still at the University of Toronto. She actually does amazing research, but also phenomenal role model in terms of entrepreneurship. And she taught me first year chemistry. And then I think in third year, I went to speak to her and I said, okay, I'm not sure what I want to do. And she's the one who said, well, what about graduate school? And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can do a PhD in chemistry. And she's like, well,
I'm not that smart. Yeah.
So she made it accessible because she made me kind of think that, yes, I can do this. And when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, you're right. It's not an end in itself. It's usually kind of to something else. And at that point, I think I decided that I actually really enjoy research and chemistry. And that's why I decided to go to
Okay. The transition from high school to university is often difficult for a lot of people because you're going from a small class, like at U of T, I understand, was it Convocation Hall where the first year classes are like 1,500 people? I haven't experienced that. I cannot imagine it.
Yes. And so that was a shock because the high school I came from, we were the first year. So we came from really, really small classes, never mind just a regular class. And a lot of the first year courses that I did take, these were the feeder courses for like basic medical sciences and those types of things. So first year biology was Convocation Hall, like 1,500 people. First year like calculus, physics, not that large, but several hundred people as well. My smallest class actually was chemistry because I decided to do a you can take the regular course or you can take like the specialist course. And I decided to take the specialist course in chemistry because there's something I enjoyed even in high school about chemistry. I did science fair in chemistry and that kind of stuff. And that was my smallest class, which was probably like 70 or 80 people. But yeah, it was a shock, to be a big fish in a little pond to then being a very like a minnow, a tadpole in a massive, massive pond. That was a shock. And also most of those very large classes, it's like multiple choice tests. It was an adjustment.
I remember sitting in my first tutorial and the first thing out of the professor's mouth was, look to the left, look to the right.
Yes. One
of you will not be here at Christmas. Yes. And I thought, that's me. And thankfully it wasn't, but he was right. So I understand that while you were at U of T, joined a club at Harthouse that focused on the stocks and finance.
Yes, and honestly, I mean, I'm trying to really search myself and figure out why. But at the time, I was so I've always had a curiosity about things, and I was really interested in stocks. But what was most attractive about stocks at that time in this club at Harthouse was so again at the time we didn't have data and information at our fingertips. And the only way to check, like if you wanted a trading account or wanted to know what the real prices were, it was extremely prohibitive and expensive to be able to do that as an individual. Or you could join this club at Hart House where they have the machine in this room and you can like check at any time. And so, yeah, I think what really drove me though is I've always had a curiosity about things. So for chemistry, as an example, it was just a way of understanding how the world works, how atoms come together to form molecules, to form materials, to form the things that surround us. And I always had a curiosity about that. And I've always had an approach where I'm curious about something. I'll see if there's an opportunity to learn more about it. In my current role at OCI, it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be in this role because it's constantly learning about new technologies and all sorts of things. And so that's why sometimes I find myself kind of doing things that kind of don't fit the overall narrative, but I was just curious. So I tried it out.
That's a great characteristic to have. So you mentioned earlier that you decided, okay, I'm not going to pursue a law degree, and you went down the chemistry path. Was that a bit of a revelation for you, or just like that aha moment where you went, yeah, that makes sense?
I think it wasn't a revelation. It was just kind of, I found myself doing more and more of the things that I enjoyed doing, taking more and more courses in chemistry. And then one day I just kind of knew the track that I was on. And it was more the research part that was very interesting to me. In fourth year, I had an opportunity to do like a capstone project and work with a professor that eventually became my supervisor for my PhD, doing some research. And I just loved it. I loved that discovery. I loved just being able to use the scientific method and think analytically and all of those things. And so when I started out in graduate school, I knew
1998.
Yes, that this is what I enjoyed doing. And I was convinced that what I wanted to do was actually have a career in research and in academia and become a professor. That's when I started out.
Talk about We're going to talk about the pivot in a moment.
what I thought when I finished my PhD.
Was graduate school much different for you than your undergraduate program?
Yes. And so what I would say is I loved my graduate experience at U of T. I decided to stay at U of T for graduate school in part because I had already started some research that summer through my fourth year project that I wanted to continue. I really found a supervisor that was working in an area that was really exciting to me. But graduate school at U of T compared to my undergraduate experience, there were night and day. So you went from these large anonymous classes where they're trying to weed people out to really small classes, to having the opportunity to work very closely with some of the best researchers in their fields anywhere in the world. We had John Poliani, Nobel Prize winner in the Department of Chemistry.
So you had him as a prof, or he was just
in the Department of Chemistry. So he's in the hallway. You can kind of like be waiting for the elevator, and there he is reading notice on a bulletin board, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a Nobel Prize winner. And so it was such an intellectually stimulating environment. It was an environment with so many kind of talented and passionate people. And at that time, some of the entrepreneurial activity that now is commonplace in not only the University of Toronto, but in universities and colleges across the province and across Canada, it was just starting to happen. So Cynthia Go, for example, she was in the Department of Chemistry and she was just starting to work on her first startup company. So that environment was a phenomenal environment to be in. I was excited about the research that I was working on. And it went from, large anonymous undergraduate classes to really a setting that had a very high level of research excellence with kind of full access to professors. You knew everyone in your classes. And it was a superb graduate experience.
So did you have any part-time jobs in university? Or were you just hyper-focused on marks?
So do you mean undergraduate or graduate?
Well, both.
So undergrad, I worked the summers. That's where I actually met my husband. I was working at
we got to talk about that. Okay.
And cafe. So
were you behind the counter or was he?
I was behind the counter. He was a waiter there. So I worked summers and then in the chemistry library during the year. Graduate, it's just structured a little bit differently in that if you're in graduate school, you're going to be a teaching assistant, a TA. So I was a TA for several lab courses as well as continued the work I was doing in the chemistry.
Hey, it's Jim again. Don't go away. When we come back, Claudia talks about finishing her PhD and realizing that the career she had planned wasn't the one she actually wanted. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. I mentioned earlier that one of the goals of this podcast is to promote the next Great Big Ideas Summit. NGBI is an independently organized fundraising initiative in support of McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about the organization. MacKids is one of the top critical care pediatric hospitals in Canada, and the team there serve patients and families in need over a huge geographic area that encompasses Niagara Falls, Brantford, Hamilton, Burlington, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, and north to Grey County. McMaster Children's Hospital serves a population of over 2 million people, and it provides world-class care. So, if you have an interest in supporting a very worthy cause, we hope you will consider supporting MacKids. For more information, please go to hamiltonhealthsciences.ca/McMaster-Children's-Hospital. Now you know our why. Let's get back to the show. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and I'm speaking today with Claudia Krywiak from the Ontario Centre of Innovation. I'm going to come back to the guy that eventually became your husband. How did you meet? It was just at work and...
So it was the summer before I started university. I was 19 because of the high school was 5 years at the time.
Right.
He is 3 years older than me, and he was going to school in the States, but was coming back in the summers to stay with his family, was staying with his grandmother at the time, and he was working. And so he was working at Future Bakery Cafe, and it's like Ukrainian. It's still around now, but they're more focused on the bakery.
Is that the one in the south end of Etobicoke?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
So going way back, there used to be multiple Future Bakery and cafes around the entire city, and we met and worked at the one on Queen Street West. It doesn't exist.
Sorry, what's his name?
Mark.
Okay.
That's confusing. That's also my brother's name.
Oh, who asked who?
So, I mean, when you're young, there's like a courtship and a dance type of thing. I thought he was cute. He thought I was cute, but I was working behind the buffet and he was a waiter. And so he would bring stuff in, and there was a bit of tension because he was very particular about, like, you know, don't put hot peppers on the sandwiches, whatever. So I didn't, and stuff like that. But he offered me a ride home because where he was staying with his grandmother, and the time where I was living at home, it was like in Etobicoke. And so that's how it started. He ended up driving me home, and increasingly, by, I'm sure, pure coincidence, we ended up working the same shifts, or kept on asking for the same shift. Yes, that's how we...
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. So you graduated with your PhD in 2003, and that year is notable for Torontonians, at least, for a number of reasons, because in March of that year, we had the SARS outbreak.
I remember that.
Yeah, as do I. And that put Toronto on the global stage for all of the wrong reasons. And in August, the other thing that happened was a power blackout. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do. I was in Ottawa at a conference because I was finishing out kind of graduate school at that point. So I had already written up my thesis. I don't think I had defended yet. I hadn't defended it yet, but I was at a conference. And I remember walking into the Byward Market to grab some lunch. And there was a group of us, and we walked into the first restaurant, and they said, "Oh, our power's out." And I thought, okay. So then we walk into another restaurant, and they said, "Oh, our power's out too." And we thought, okay, I guess it's in the entire Byward Market. So then we started to kind of walk out of the Byward Market. And as we're walking, there was like a CBC crew there. I walked by them, and I said, "Do you know what's going on?" I go, "Is it all of Ottawa?" And he said, "It's the entire eastern seaboard of North America." And I'm like, whoa, that sounds very, very serious. But what was interesting is as the day wore on, because right across the bridge in Hull, Quebec, they were on a different grid. So everyone was going over the bridge to get money out of the ATMs. And then coming back, but we spent the day, I'll never forget it. Like all the restaurants and stuff, like the ice cream places were like just giving ice cream and stuff away. People were sitting on their, like on lawn chairs on lawns, just outside talking to each other. Candles were kind of lit. I called Mark, my boyfriend at the time, and we chatted. And there wasn't much information. Like we take for granted how much information we have right now. Like instantaneously, you go on X, you can figure out what is going on. But there was like a good 12 hours where people were not sure what was actually going on, and was it a big deal, and was this going to get worse?
I've got my own stories, but we all survived. At that time, the Canadian economy was also taking a bit of a hit, and I think getting a PhD at that point in science, there were, generally speaking, two career paths. You taught or you went into big pharma. And as you mentioned earlier, at that point, universities were just starting to see the first hints of entrepreneurialism from professors. And up to that point, profit was a dirty word in universities by and large. And I'm wondering if you had a tough time landing your first job.
So I did not, but that was I think an exceptional circumstance. But what you say is absolutely true. The reality is, in terms of innovation indices, countries will count the number of PhDs that they produce, and they'll say, well, we score well on innovation because we produce very highly skilled talent. But you need to look at the receptor capacity in industry for those PhDs. At the time, and I would also say arguably even now, the receptor capacity wasn't necessarily there. We didn't have many large R&D operations in Canada that were hiring PhDs. And if they were hiring PhDs, they would hire one PhD and a whole bunch of undergraduate or master's degrees and one PhD to supervise them. And the way the PhD happened is it was designed to largely prepare you for a career in academia. So my area of study in chemistry was inorganic reaction mechanisms, an extremely theoretical area, super fascinating, but extremely theoretical. No industry partner that was directly involved in that. It contributed to our knowledge of catalysts and those types of things, but there wasn't much exposure to industry partners while you're doing your 4 years of a PhD. And I realized when I finished that I actually did not want to do a career in academia. And I didn't want to do a career in academia for a couple of reasons. One was the boyfriend that was becoming very, very serious. So Mark, he had by now not only finished his studies, he had been in a job for several years and was making kind of his way up. If I wanted to continue in academia, I would have had to go away somewhere else and do a postdoc. And typically you go to the US or you go to Europe, and then you do that for at least a couple of years. And then when you look for an academic position, it's typically it could be anywhere in the world. And there are way more PhDs than there are academic positions for them. And so I knew that I didn't want to go down the academic path. I was worried about what kind of job I would find. I was applying to a lot of places in the 6 months before I defended and graduated, and I wasn't getting much interest. Similarly from my friends and colleagues who were graduating around the same time. But what ended up happening is applied to a company called Bruker, and they made NMR instruments, so nuclear magnetic resonance instruments. And these are like very large MRIs, but instead of looking at bodies, they look at molecules. You find these instruments, they cost several millions of dollars, and you find them in big pharmaceutical companies and government research labs and university research labs. And I had used one of these instruments in my studies to observe these reactions that were part of my PhD thesis. And Bruker, which is a multinational company headquartered in Germany, they had one office in Canada, in Milton, and they were hiring for an NMR applications chemist. And I applied for that role. And I was by no means an NMR specialist. And at this point, I was applying for anything and everything that had like the word chemist in there and kind of ignoring what the other parts were. And I ended up getting an interview. So I was so excited because this was like my first serious interview out of all of the resumes that I had sent out. And it was on the day right after my PhD defense.
So you were wired.
And so my PhD defense was one of the most stressful days in my entire life. I'll still never forget how nervous I was, because the way a defense works, and the word defense is intentional, you're defending 4 or 5 years of the original research that you have done. And your defense committee is your supervisor. and then an independent and like a friendly. And they grill you on your research and you have to like defend it. And I remember the moments before I went into my PhD defense, I was so nervous where I thought, I can't even like stand up. I'm like having an anxiety attack. And U of T has this gravitas. Like they take things very, very, very seriously. It's like academia with a big A. And so I really wanted this interview. And I knew that I probably wouldn't be a good idea to say, hey, can we reschedule it? So I said, hey, no problem. 9 a.m. The next day I can do it. My PhD defense went extremely well. And I was riding that high when I went into the interview the next day, because even though this wasn't my area of expertise, afterwards, when this is many months later, and I became good friends with my boss at the time, she said, like, you came in there so confident that you just blew all of the other applicants out of the water. And
I just got my PhD. And
I figured, like, if I can do that, where I thought I was going to pass out from nerves, then I can do almost anything. So I ended up getting a second and a third interview. I asked them afterwards, like, why did you hire me? There were other applicants whose area of PhD study was NMR, that whole area. And that was just the tool that I had used. And what they had said to me was, what really came across was your curiosity and your ability to learn. And they said that they were looking for someone that they could actually train in the way they needed to train them, rather than having to bring someone in who thought they were an expert in this area and then having them unlearn all of the things that they needed them to learn. But just to give you a sense of how hard at that time it was to find a job, I worked for Brooker for several years. And then when I eventually left Brooker to move on to my tax, I remember at the time meeting with a professor at U of T in the Department of Chemistry on something that was related to my new role. And he said to me, he's like, why did you leave Brooker? Like that's what everyone wanted. You were one of the very, very few who actually got a job with one of the very few companies. Yes, so it was a really exciting role to be in. So we supported the sales team in that these instruments and all of the accessories that came with these instruments required very sophisticated training. And often when the sales team was trying to make a sale for one of these, and keeping in mind that one of the higher end instruments could go for several millions of dollars, the application chemists, we would come in and we would show the prospective client, like, look what this instrumentation can do. Look at the experiments that you can do. Tell us about your research. We can show you what this instrumentation can do in terms of unlocking the power of your experiments. So I got to visit every single province, every single university in Canada as a part of that. At the time, I mean, it's changed in Quebec, but that's where at that time, big pharma was. So I got to visit all of those labs and work with all of those researchers. I got to travel to the US, where Brooker had an office, and also to Germany as well. I loved all the travel. It was phenomenal, but there was a lot. There was a lot of travel at the time. Yeah. And May 2008 corresponds to when I had my son. And so what was so exciting to me before I had my son and all of that travel, I realized that I needed to make a decision, and it wasn't sustainable for me to be able to do that job, which fundamentally at the end of the day was working with researchers all over Canada and traveling to Europe and the US as required. I wouldn't be able to do that at the same level I'd been able to do that before. So I was looking for an opportunity to make the switch. And I also realized that what had me really excited wasn't necessarily doing my own research, but Brooker gave me a hint of the power of facilitating other people to do incredible things when it came to R&D and technology development. That's why I decided to leave.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier you went to my tax.
Yes.
And I don't have a science background, and I've heard a whole bunch of things about it, but I'm not fully cognizant of what the organization is and does.
So they're a very important organization in Canada in that they're a national organization that supports largely graduate students to do internship projects where they work with industry partners. So remember when I was saying that a traditional PhD prepares you for an academic career, and at the end of that journey, you may end up not going into academia. What my tax does very well is provide graduate students with an opportunity to work with industry partner as a part of their PhD thesis or as a part of their research study. So they get that hands-on industry experience, the opportunity to solve industry challenges, and they do this across Canada. Though back then, they were just starting out in Vancouver. They were based out of Vancouver, had done internships largely focused on graduate students in mathematics, and were now looking to expand into other disciplines, but also looking to expand into Ontario. So I was their first hire in Ontario.
And sorry, this is a not-for-profit organization funded by government.
Yes, it is. So that was
federal government?
Largely by the federal government, but they also receive provincial funding. And at the time when they hired me, that hire was made possible by funding they received from the provincial government in Ontario. And it's funny because knowing now what I know about how things work, it's incredible that I took that leap because I went from the private sector to a not-for-profit that's just kind of starting out. I was going to be their first employee in Ontario. And what I found out after the fact was when they were interviewing me, they still actually hadn't finalized their Ontario funding yet. So there was a bit of uncertainty there. And if my son, for example, came to me with the same scenario today, I'm not sure I would say to him, go for it. Take a risk on this completely new opportunity where, head office is in Vancouver and you're going to be employee number one in Ontario on your own. But I really enjoyed the role. I thought the work they were doing, and I continue to think the work that they're doing is very important.
Yeah, and it worked out, obviously. Yes. So you were about a year and a half into your jobs with MyTax, and then you were appointed Vice President of Business Development for Ontario. Did that title kind of recognize the work you were already doing?
Yes. So a big part of that role was operationalizing the internship program in Ontario and getting industry partners to sign on to the internship program and take on interns. But also a big part of it was actually building out the operations, building out the team and the partnerships in Ontario. And as the office grew from like 1 to 5 to 30 or 40, I found myself in a natural leadership position. And then I was promoted into that leadership position for.
So you were, I guess, after almost 3 years at MyTax in March 2011, you took a job as Director of Partnership Development and Corporate Planning with an organization called the Ontario Centre of Innovation.
Yes. So at the time, it was the Ontario Centres of Excellence. So one of the things that I really realized that I've always liked to do, in addition to just being curious and loving science and loving enabling science, I'm a builder. So I like opportunities where you can build something new. And that's why the opportunity with MyTax was so attractive to me, because it was an opportunity to kind of build from the ground up. At the time, MyTax had a partnership with OCI. Then it was called OCE. And I was responsible for, I was liaising with my counterpart at OCI on that partnership opportunity. And what he pitched me on, and he's long left OCI, but at the time he kind of pitched me on an opportunity to build the new OCI. And what really impressed me about OCI was just the legacy. Currently, OCI is in its 38th year. It was originally established as a separate centers of excellence based at academic institutions and focused on industry academic R&D collaborations. But over the years, it has really responded to changes in the market and evolved to be really focused on driving the development and commercialization of new technologies in very innovative ways. And at the time when I was with MyTax, we were growing it. It was having tremendous impact. But at the end of the day, it was internships. And what really struck me about the opportunity at OCI was it was an opportunity to be more involved and more innovative and different types of models of supporting industry to develop new technologies, being involved in technology development and kind of building the new OCI. And so I decided to take the role. I left MyTax, joined OCI, very quickly was promoted to VP of Corporate Development at OCI. And I've been at OCI now for about 13 years. And the last 6 of those years have been as CEO. So I started as Director of Partnerships, went to VP of Corporate Development, and then became CEO.
Hi, it's Jim. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, Claudia and I talk about OCI and what she sees on the horizon in AI, quantum computing, and life sciences. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. If you're a new listener, we would like you to know this podcast is also part of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is an annual national networking event for the Canadian life sciences community, and we invite you to attend. For details on tickets and sponsorship, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. You were interim CEO, I guess, July 2019. In October of that year, you were appointed on a full-time basis. Yes. I should probably mention I'm on the board of directors of Innovation Factory. And so...
We know you very well.
Well, we're practically related. Yeah, cards on the table. There's, 17 centers of excellence across the province? And what's the relationship between your organization and the other organizations?
So those 17, those are regional innovation centers, or RICs. Right. An innovation factory is one of them. And so OCI's role in the innovation ecosystem is we kind of do three things. One, we deploy innovation programs on behalf of the Ontario government that support small and medium-sized companies to develop and commercialize new technologies. And a lot of those small and medium-sized companies, especially startups, are coming through the regional innovation centers, through places like Innovation Factory. So we actually, through the programs that we deploy, we end up funding a lot of those companies. Number two, we're like a connector and a convener and a collaborator. And in addition to funding companies, we actually fund things that are like regional technology development sites. So Innovation Factory is one of the sites that we support, among many others, and fund on a specific initiative related to the automotive and the mobility sector. But that's because that's our way of kind of leveraging existing capacity in the ecosystem, building out a network and being a connector and ensuring that there's a well-coordinated ecosystem that companies can navigate quite easily. And then finally, our third role is around a de-risking agent. So we work with companies that are developing technologies at a very, very early stage, pre-seed or seed stage. And we work with investors, with regional innovation centers, and with others to de-risk that opportunity. We can invest in that opportunity and bring angel investors to invest in it as well. So I would say it's a very nice relationship in that we work very kind of collaboratively and closely together on the mutual goal of helping Ontario companies bring new technologies to market.
Thank you for that description. You have a number of programs and awards and funds within OCI, but I'd like to selfishly focus on one in particular, the Life Sciences Innovation Fund. What is that fund all about?
So Ontario's Life Sciences Innovation Fund is part of the Ontario government's strategy for the life sciences sector to help accelerate the commercialization of technologies related to therapeutics, med tech, health, IT, and other areas related to human health sciences. And OCI delivers the Life Sciences Innovation Fund on behalf of the Ontario government. The way the fund works is it's a co-investment fund. So we will look at startup companies in the life sciences sector that are at the pre-seed or seed stage, and they're developing new technology that has very high potential. We will help bring angel investors around that opportunity, and we will co-invest with angel investors into that opportunity. So for example, under LSIF, which is the acronym for Ontario's Life Sciences Innovation Fund, we will co-invest up to $500,000 into a seed stage or pre-seed stage Ontario-based life sciences company in order to help that company commercialize its technology and bring it to market. To date, we have 30 investments in our portfolio, and the fund is currently open and looking for new investment opportunities. So any life sciences companies that are out there that are at an early stage,
Based in Ontario,
please come talk to our business development managers about this seed fund.
And sorry, the minimum and maximum investment that you're looking at making?
So the typical investment is we put in $500,000, but that $500,000 needs co-investment from angel investors. So the minimum investment in total would be $1 million. Half would come from us, and the other half has to come from private investors. Private investors can put in more, and they often do as a part of a syndicated round. Our check size is $500,000.
And how large is your team?
We have about 95 people at OCI, and the main office is in Toronto, but we have a BD business development team that's deployed across the province. So in communities everywhere from Sudbury to Windsor to Hamilton to Waterloo and to parts in between. And what we like to say is our business development team is our secret sauce. They are the connectors and the conveners. They know everyone and everything that's going on related to new technology development and commercialization in the regions that they serve. And they help connect companies not only to OCI programs, but they help connect them to other partner programs, to potential collaborators, whether these are industry or academic collaborators, and they also connect them to investors and to talent. And that's where I kind of started out at MyTax on the business development team, and OCI's approach is a feet on the ground approach where you have BDs engaging directly with our companies to ensure that they spend half of their time with industry, understanding what the industry challenges are, and the balance of their time either at colleges, universities, understanding what the resources and the capability is there, and then they bring the two together and put together tremendous proposals and potential projects that we either fund or are funded through other partner organizations.
Okay. What are your priorities over the next 6 to 12 months?
There is a lot that we have on the go, and it's a very exciting time right now, but it's a rapidly evolving time. Technology's accelerating at such a rapid pace. Like AI is one example. And one of the initiatives that we're introducing across all sectors is really focused on not just technology development and commercialization, but it's focused on getting companies to adopt these technologies. So whether it's through something called DCC, the Digitalization Competence Center, where this is funding for companies to actually bring someone in that will help them with digital technology adoption, and also funding potential demonstration and pilot projects. There's a very strong focus on that. In the agri-food, mining, advanced manufacturing, and construction sectors, we have the Critical Industrial Technologies Initiative that also has a very strong focus on driving adoption of critical technologies across those key sectors. So a lot of work there. And we continue to do a lot of work at the convergence of the automotive and mobility to drive technology development, but also adoption of connected, autonomous, and electric vehicle technologies. And I spoke about the life sciences sector. So, priorities are critical advanced technologies and getting them developed, commercialized, and adopted across those key sectors. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the pace of technological advancement is so rapid right now that, I've been at OCI for 13 years. And when I think back to what the world looked like from a technology perspective 13 years ago, we did not have generative AI. We certainly did not have agentic AI or AI agents. We didn't have connected vehicles. We didn't have electrification of our automotive industries. And fast forward to where we are today, that's a lot of change over the span of 13 years. But I believe, based on how quickly things are moving over the next 2 years, we'll probably see more technological advancement and change in those 2 years than we've seen in the last decade.
Wow. So you also have a relatively new industry event. Was it Discovery X that's taking place?
So Discovery X, it's been around for quite a while. With COVID, there was a hiatus, like with all in-person events, but we brought it back a couple of years ago. So we just ran the second one back in April, and next April 29th to April 30th at the Enercare Center, we are doing Discovery X 2026. So if you are an innovator, a researcher, an investor, if you want to engage with and see Ontario's innovation ecosystem live and in person and meet some amazing companies with some incredible technologies, please come. It is an event that truly brings together all of the universities, colleges, regional innovation centers, investors, startup companies, tech companies with really cool and new innovations for a day and a half of discussion, of innovation showcases, of pitch competitions, and of really amazing keynotes. Last year, we had Jeffrey Hinton, and he just blew everyone away with his remarks on AI. And this year's Discovery, or the upcoming Discovery 2026, is going to be bigger and better than before. But when we say innovation ecosystem, Sometimes people say, what is that? That's not a thing. Come to Discovery X, you will see it up close and personal, and you will be able to connect with everyone and anyone in that ecosystem over the course of a day and a half.
I look forward to attending. The organization you had is involved, I think, in just a huge number of projects, and a lot of them aren't even close to being on the radar of the public. And it's innovation at its cutting edge. And I'm wondering if there's anything in particular or any tech that is firing you and your team up at the moment. In other words, do you have a favorite child?
I will kind of highlight just some general technology areas. So one is what is happening in quantum computing specifically. So we had the opportunity at an early stage to support Christian Wiedbrock, who is the CEO of Xanadu. Xanadu is a quantum computing company. They are a scale-up company. They're based in Toronto, and they're punching way above their weight. They've raised very significant VC funding, and their direct competitors are companies like Alphabet and like IBM, and they're holding their own against those competitors. What is really, really exciting is when we talk about truly transformative technologies, quantum computing is going to be, if you can believe it, even more transformative than AI, especially the convergence of AI and quantum computing will unlock tremendous opportunities. And we have one of the few companies and one of the top contenders in the world right here in Canada, in Toronto, and that's Xanadu. And there are people that will say that the countries or the jurisdictions that will dominate AI and quantum computing are the ones that will actually dominate the global economy in the future. And we have the AI talent here and resources, and we have companies like Xanadu that are on the bleeding edge of technology development in this area, where with the right resources and support, they will scale and they will succeed. And the impact that these companies have, I don't think we can even conceive of the impact that they'll have. So I'm really excited about quantum computing. I use Xanadu as just one example. And the reason I use Xanadu is we met Christian early on in his journey. He had just finished a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Toronto and was thinking about, do I go on and continue in academia, or do I start my own company and try to commercialize some of the research? I remember at the time that he was doing in quantum computing, and we said, oh my gosh, quantum computing.
How are you going to make a dollar doing that?
Yeah. Exactly. And now he's looking to build the world's first quantum data center and to build it here in Canada. So that's really, really exciting. What we're seeing happening with AI integration is really, really exciting. So AI integration in the life sciences sector is very exciting. And how AI is transforming discovery, materials research, and also how it will transform healthcare and how we experience and interact with practitioners and medical professionals as well. These are things that we will start to see in the short to medium term. Quantum computing is a bit to the longer term, but again, I maintain what I said earlier. We will see more transformative technological change in the next 2 years than we have seen in the last decade. And so there is no better time to be an innovator or an entrepreneur than now, and no better place than Ontario because of the supports that are currently available and the robust innovation ecosystem that we have here. And if you're a researcher, an entrepreneur, an innovator, please come to OCI, because not only do we have programming and supports that can help you, if we don't, we are connected to people that we can connect you to the ecosystem that can help you given the stage that you may be at. So a really exciting time.
Absolutely. I've just got two questions, and I've so enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you making the time. You and your team have the privilege of kind of sitting at the intersection of innovation and commercialization and working with the entrepreneurs you've been talking about up close, and again, before they're on the radar of a lot of people. And some of them are successful. I would hazard most of them are not. It's part of the process. And I'm wondering if there's any advice you can offer our younger listeners in particular, or our older listeners who are new at entrepreneurialism. And I know there's no secret sauce, but is there any advice you would give to someone who's contemplating a trip down that path?
So I think the most compelling and important advice that I've heard. So this isn't my advice, but this is advice I always repeat. Don't be afraid to start. Don't be afraid to fail, because failing is actually the only way you're going to learn. If you're not failing, you're not learning. And if you look at Christian Weedbrock from Xanadu, Armin from IntelliJoint, Toby from Shopify, they took a risk. They were passionate about an idea and they tried. And so the best piece of advice is don't be afraid to fail. And if you fail, that's okay. That's actually great, because that means you've learned something. And then you can apply that to your next opportunity. And there are so many supports that are available. If you say, well, I don't know where to start, you have OCI, you have the regional innovation centers like Innovation Factory, Venture Lab, Communitech, et cetera. You have the Small Business Enterprise Center. So even if you're not a tech entrepreneur, there are resources that are out there that are available to help you get started. And really, genuinely, there is no better time to become an entrepreneur than right now. And I think if you and I are having this discussion 5 years from now, we can look back at this moment in time, which is a transformative time, but also a very disruptive time, as being the time where some of the most exciting and impactful companies in Canada were first born, basically. Yeah. So don't be afraid to fail. Failing is a good thing because it means you're learning.
And just start. So last question we end all of our interviews on, and that question is, and I think you might have already answered it, what is the next great big idea on your horizon, Claudia?
I think the next big idea, so 2 parts for OCI, is really leaning into driving the adoption of these critical technologies, ensuring that they're developed here, scaled here, and adopted by our industries, and a very strong focus on the sectors that I've outlined: advanced manufacturing, automotive, mining, agri-food, life sciences, construction sector. In terms of what's next more broadly in terms of technological advancement, easy. Integration of AI into literally everything, and the convergence of AI and quantum computing. The change that is going to drive is going to be phenomenal. And it will make things possible that I personally thought I would never see in my lifetime. So for example, things like a cure for cancer. That the convergence of those technologies and the integration of those technologies into trying to solve some of the greatest climate and health challenges that we have. So it is an exciting time. It's a disruptive time, but it is an exciting time.
Yeah, disruptive on a whole bunch of different levels, but that's a whole other interview. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a privilege to sit down with you.
Oh, it's been great to chat with you. I really enjoyed our conversation. It's been great.
Likewise.
You made me remember all of these things that I haven't thought about in years, but this conversation has been a wonderful journey. Thank you.
That was Claudia Krywiak of the Ontario Centre of Innovation in Toronto, Ontario. If you'd like to learn more about the work Claudia and her team are doing, please go to oc-innovation.ca. You can also follow them on social at OC Innovation. For information about this podcast and our other shows, please visit nextgreatbigideas.com. You can also follow us on social at NGBI Podcasts, and you can follow me at Lab Occupier. To learn about what I do when I'm not hosting podcasts, please visit jim-wilson.ca. And you can learn about my team and what we do at laboccupier.com. This episode of NGB Ideas was researched by Xenia Pinto and edited by No Limit Marketing. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email. My address is jwilson@Leonard, that's LENNARD.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. I'm Jim Wilson, and you've been listening to NGB Ideas. Thanks so much for joining us. See you next time.